Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you to the Alzheimer's Society for the invitation this evening and to the library. The library gave me a bit of a moment today because you start off in Scotland, and then you come on a plane all the way over to Toronto, and then you come on a train all the way to London, and then you drop your bag in the hotel and you come along the main street and the library's closed. And you think, was this the right London? Did I come to the wrong place? And then, of course, it's because you're having refurbishment. So that was good. Now we found the entrance. So I hope no one else had any difficulty finding their way in this evening. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate people giving up their time to come. One of the things that I often bring with me when I visit other countries, I usually have a fan with me because I'm quite often places that don't have the nice air conditioning that is in here. But this fan actually has a picture of Scotland on it, and it really would make you laugh because the one thing you would never need in Scotland would be a fan. But the fan actually is related to a story about the creation of the book because, as you know, the foreword to the book was done by Dame Judi Dench. And Dame Judi has been a friend of the University of Stirling and the Dementia Centre there for more than 10 years. She was in a film called Iris, which was about the famous writer and philosopher Iris Murdoch, who unfortunately had dementia before she died. And so when we were creating our dementia centre, Dame Judi kindly came and opened it, and we called the centre after Iris Murdoch because we wanted to show that dementia was something that could affect just about anybody in the world. So I'm just seeing notes being passed around. No, it's not from me. That's good. So we were really pleased when last year Dame Judi agreed that she would come and accept an honorary degree from the University of Stirling. And the honorary degree is something that is presented in a big ceremony with lots of lights. So it is the one time in Stirling when you would need a fan. And what happened was I had got some fans from the dollar shop, well, they call it the pound shop in Scotland, and I had a number of them in my pocket. So every time she looked as if she was a bit warm, I would give her one of my fans and then she would lose it. She'd put it down somewhere, but I always produced another one. So it was wonderful how all day Dame Judi was able to keep herself nice and cool. But I won't waft the fan anymore because I know that is affecting the microphone. So a really important thing this evening is that sometimes when people are talking about dementia, you find that you have questions that you want to ask, but those questions are so personal that you wouldn't necessarily want to ask them in front of other people. So my offer this evening is that when I'm finished, people will be able to either from the screen or from my business card, they'll be able to see my email address, and I'm happy to take any questions afterwards that were too difficult to ask this evening. But there will also be time to ask questions because feel confident to ask them. There will be other people in the room who really want you to ask that question and who will be interested in sharing the answer. But if it's something really private, we can do that privately. So the question is, why was this book written? And I'm really excited because this is actually the first time I've had a copy in my hand this evening because they sent the copies when they were printed to my house, but I had already left before, so I'm really, really pleased to have this one here in my hand. But this is an edition of a book that we actually wrote in Scotland. And the book that I wrote before, which is called Dementia, the One-Stop Guide, is dead useful if you live in Scotland, because it's got information about dementia, but it also has information about the health and social care system there. And when we'd written it, we were astonished at how quickly it sold, because clearly there was a thirst for that information. They said, well, we do one for North America, which takes out all the local stuff that you're probably not interested in about our system. But in writing that book, it's really important that I confess it's a family effort to write the book. Now, the first part of the effort was made by my husband and daughter because they left me for 6 weeks so I could write it. They left the country, they went on a father and daughter trip of a lifetime to New Zealand. So that was the decks cleared. The second part of the family was my mother's role, because my mother was a retired secretary and she proofread it and got all the grammar right for me. And the third part was my father. Now, my father, who was a bus driver for most of his life, not a great intellectual, but a man who liked to read. And he read it carefully, and if there were any words in there that he thought were unnecessary, he told me to take them out. Now, there are some words that I thought everybody understands, like contraindicated. I thought contraindicated everybody knew. And my dad said, what does that mean? And I said, it means it's not a very good idea. And he said, well, put that it's not a very good idea. So, in Scotland, even if you're a professor, you're just kept on the ground at the right level. And so it was lovely that Susan said a little bit about who I am, but usually when I'm going to take up an hour of somebody's busy life, I think it's important that I should explain who I am before I start. And I am a nurse by background, and I've worked in a wide range of settings, but for the last 10 years of my life, I've been the director of the Dementia Centre at the University of Stirling. And people associate universities with research, and of course we've got researchers there, and people associate universities with teaching undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, and you can do that there. In fact, the degree in dementia studies you can do by distance learning, and we even have Canadian students who've completed their degree from here, the postgraduate degree in dementia studies. But the main part that I have focused on is on working with people who are not looking for a degree, people who just want information that helps, practical information that they can use immediately. And also, I work on what we call consultancy, except consultancy isn't a very nice word. You know, it sounds like someone who borrows your watch and then tells you what time it is. I hope I haven't offended any consultants in the room. But the consultancy is about going to places where they have got dementia-related problems and helping them with the knowledge we have from around the world about what potential solutions might be. So it's helping people to catch up with each other. And of course, the great thing is I then learn from those countries, and there are things I can bring back to where I came from. So that's what I do. Now, this diagram here is one that I've used in every one of my presentations for a long time. And so if you've seen any of the presentations online, or you've seen anything on the internet, if you've even seen some of the diagrams that are in the book, then you would know this diagram. And it's not a graph, it's just an indication of how things go. And it's the basis of all the advice that's in the book. The thing about somebody with dementia is, unfortunately, they've got a condition which means they're going to go downhill. They're going to become less able to look after themselves over time. And what we want for people with dementia is that they stay as well as possible for as long as possible. So the journey for a person with dementia might be like this. You can see how the person's gone along the top line for as long as possible and then eventually goes downhill quite quickly. And when I ask people with dementia, they say that's the kind of journey they'd like to have. You see the person goes down between two stages. The top line is going down the stage where they're a little bit dependent and they need someone to help them at home. And then the second line is when they're perhaps so dependent that they need to be in institutional care, i.e. in a care home or residential care. So that's the journey that most people say they would like to have. But unfortunately, some people have a journey that's more like this. And that's where they go downhill very quickly. And all of the advice that I'm going to give in this lecture and the advice that's in this book is about how can you stay on the top journey for as long as possible. Because there are things you can do to keep yourself as well as you can be. Now, not all of the things work for everybody, but it's worth knowing about them because they can help. And the top journey is the one that I would like, because I'll be more free range, I'll be more independent. You know, I want at the age of 90 to, die after falling off my motorbike on the way home from an all-night party. That's the way I'd like to go, because I'm not concentrating because someone else's wife is chasing me because I looked at her husband the wrong way. So that's how I want to go at 90. I don't want to have going downhill fast. But anybody else, even the finance director of my local health system wants me to be on the top journey, because the bottom journey is much more expensive. It's expensive in resources, it's expensive, and it's not very nice. But the other thing I'm going to talk about, and I mention in the book, is this particular issue. If I'm doing all the things that keep me as well as possible and keep me on the top line, but I have a problem, and for example, I have a fall, if I give you an example, one of the things that can keep you as well as possible, it is said, is a glass of red wine a day. That research comes from the University of Bordeaux. And I personally don't like red wine. Unfortunately, the University of Reading in England has come up with research that shows a glass of champagne has the same effect. So I'm really quite pleased about that. Now, there's lots of other evidence for things seriously that will keep you up there. The thing for which there's the strongest evidence is exercise, and I'm glad to hear that even today in London there's been an exercise class going on, encouraging people. It's never too soon to start, it's never too late to start with your bits of exercise, and you don't have to pound round a treadmill, as long as you just keep it moving, that's important. So a number of things that will keep you on the top line, one of which, of course, is a glass of champagne. But if I come out of the wine bar in Edinburgh and I've not been able to control myself and I've had too many glasses of champagne and I fall and fracture my neck of femur and I end up in a hospital, my chances of getting back to my previous level of functioning are really slim. And it just is the case, whenever I talk to anyone about this, they say, yes, my mum or my uncle, they had to go to hospital and they never got back. They ended up going somewhere else. And it doesn't matter if it was a fracture or if it was a urinary tract infection. And from a research point of view, we used to wonder if what was happening was at the time of the incident that led to the hospital admission, that's up here, I was doing well, I was quite independent, but then I fell over. At that time, they say, oh, well, the daughter realised after she went into hospital that she wasn't coping at home. Actually, I was coping at home, and what happened was the acute hospital did something to me that meant that I wasn't able to come back. And so one of the things that's really important in the book, particularly in chapter 12, is advice on what you can do when someone with dementia is admitted to an ordinary hospital to make sure that the hospital doesn't do them any harm. Now, I love hospitals. I've been in charge of hospitals. I've been the matron or director of nursing of hospitals. Hospitals do amazing things every day, but they're not geared up for people with dementia, and they could never be. So those of us who are volunteers, those of us who are relatives, we have to do what we can to support the person with dementia when they're in the acute hospital. And the hospital systems have to do their part as well by allowing us to visit. But there'll be more about that later in the presentation. So this really is the diagram that all of the things that we're talking about focus on in the book. And you see there are lots of arrows pointing up the way. And so I'll talk about some of the things that will push people up onto the high ground. So that's where we're starting. But the first and most fundamental thing, and I know there are lots of people here who have been to lots of presentations about dementia. For some people it might be the first time. The key thing is to think about what are the problems in dementia? What are the things that bother people most? Now, in general, people are aware of the fact that it involves an impairment of memory, and people are aware of the fact that it quite often involves difficulty in working things out. The person often has problems in learning anything new, and that makes things very stressful indeed. And then the normal changes of ageing, but at the same time a reduced capacity to cope with them. Now, one of the ways in which I often illustrate this is with what happens when perhaps you wake up in an unfamiliar hotel. Now, you all look far too respectable for this, but does anybody ever wake up in a hotel not sure where they are? It's even worse if you're not sure who you're with. But the key thing about that is I sometimes wake up not sure where I am, and so I've forgotten where I am, but I can work it out. I see my briefcase, I see my computer, I open the curtains, and there I am. I'm in the place that's familiar. Now, the thing about a person with dementia is they may have difficulty working it out if they're not 100% sure where they are, and that's incredibly stressful. Can you imagine how I would feel if I woke up in my hotel and 3 minutes later, even just 3 minutes later, I still couldn't work out where I was? I would be beside myself. I'd think, have I been kidnapped? Have I been locked in? What's the matter? And so this is one of the things that intrigues me. Such a huge amount of the research that goes into improving things for people with dementia is focused on things that will improve their memories. But in fact, for most people with dementia and their carers, it's the effects of stress that cause most of the symptomatic difficulties. And although there are some things you can do to help with memory problems, the thing to always have in mind is that you're dealing with stress as a major, major issue. And of course, the majority of people with dementia are older, so they have the usual impairments that come with ageing. You know, I've had to learn that a pair of glasses is not an accessory, a hair accessory, but fortunately, because I always have them in my hair, I never have difficulty in reading anything. But as you get older, it may be with dementia you forget to use some of the assistance that you're supposed to use. So, now, the thing that I just described there was dementia. And quite often people, after I've had a conversation about it, say, can you tell us what the connection is between dementia and Alzheimer's disease, or dementia and other problems? The print's a bit small here to be able to see it, but the key thing about this is that the symptoms of dementia can be caused by a number of different diseases. The commonest one is Alzheimer's disease, and vascular disease comes a close second. And if anybody wants to know more about that, there are some brilliant leaflets out there from Alzheimer's Society, and there's great information on the website. So we don't need to spend too much time worrying about the specifics about that. But one of the reasons why it's useful to know the difference between the disease and the symptoms is because of the information that you get a lot of times in public. For example, in the newspapers. The newspaper might say, oh, here's something that's a cure for dementia, or here's something that's a cure for Alzheimer's. And quite often the journalists, because journalists these days aren't like they used to be, we used to have specialist journalists who understood the subject, but now the journalists they're pressed for time, they have much more general expertise, so they're quite often writing something down without really understanding the language, and so they can confuse you by what it is they say. And so it's important when people are saying they've found a cure for this or that, that you understand whether or not they're talking about the underlying disease or the symptom. Because with the symptoms in dementia, there's a lot you can do. But sometimes with the pathology, with the underlying disease, there isn't at present a huge amount that you can do. And that's why sometimes you get doctors who are quite nihilistic about dementia. They say, oh, what's the point in having a diagnosis because there's nothing you can do. And what the doctor really means is, there's nothing I can prescribe. I'm absolutely paralysed, I can't cure, I feel really, really bad about this. Whereas in fact, there's lots that can be done. There's lots that can be done about dementia. And there's the nihilism that people have is something that is quite understandable, but we need to tackle it. So when people say there's nothing you can do about dementia, the answer is you can, because dementia is the symptoms. But if someone says there's nothing you can do about Alzheimer's disease, well, that's probably not exactly true, but it's more understandable why they would say that. So what we did at the Dementia Centre at Stirling was we asked people who were affected by dementia, both people who had dementia and the carers who looked after them, we asked them which were the symptoms that caused them most problems. And then we got some research from the University of Leeds in England, where they'd actually looked at lots of different studies which described what the problems were. And these were the things that came up. It was agitation, anxiety, aggression. I bet you think I'm really clever saying these up. I'm actually reading them off this screen here. I don't know what it says behind me. I'm not allowed to turn around because it takes me away from the microphone. So it's hallucination, sleeplessness and wandering. Now these were the things that came out as the top things that bothered people about dementia. And you notice that memory problems aren't even on that list. People with dementia say, well, I always had a memory problem. I mean, I have memory problems. I have to keep asking people. I have to keep looking at my iPad, checking my agenda. I always have difficulty remembering things, but I can work things out. The problem in dementia is the problem of working things out. And when the person can't remember things and can't work them out, they get agitated, and that's when you start getting depressed behaviour or angry behaviour. And so these are the things that people are bothered about. And what we produced was a small book called 10 Helpful Hints, and you can buy this book off Amazon. And for each of those problems that are described there are 10 hints for how you manage them. And this is the original book that actually gave rise to the longer book. That book is really very short, and for people who don't have any time, this is a really good book to get. And the sorts of examples are things that you can do which don't require any kind of medication. These are things that you can do that you already have the resources in your own home. So I just want to say, is there any one of these that you would like me to particularly elaborate on, of these things? Anybody got any of these problems, or know of anybody who's got any of these problems? Yes?
Agitation and anxiety, please.
Agitation and anxiety. Agitation and anxiety is hugely problematic for people with dementia. And there are some circumstances where when people have it, they are so disturbed that people feel that they ought to be sedated. Perhaps clinical people feel that they would have to be sedated because of the symptoms that they've got. Of course, in some circumstances, sedation is appropriate, but it should be the absolute last resort, and it should be something that is used very, very sparingly, depending on what kind of disease it is that's causing the dementia. So in the book about agitation and anxiety, 10 different things are looked at. One of the things is to try and find out what it is that is upsetting the person. And that sounds dead simple, but sometimes we're unaware in dementia about what it is that bothers people. A noisy environment, for example, is said to be more disabling for a person with dementia than a stair is for a person in a wheelchair. The noise that is around them. There's something in particular about some of the concentration issues that a person with dementia has that makes it difficult to distinguish between noise and sound. And so when we're sitting in a room like this, we're probably not aware of people rustling papers, or people coughing, or the occasional mobile phone, or, you know. We know that we have to ignore those things. You know, there was a man here clicking a camera a moment ago, the central heating is there. We can actually distract ourselves from that by focusing on it, but the person with dementia has difficulty doing that. So you can actually reduce agitation just by doing a sound audit of the environment and reducing all the unnecessary sound. I go to care homes and say these people are agitated, and I say, well, could you reduce the noise in here? And they say, well, there's no noise in here. And I say, well, apart from this tumble dryer and this washing machine and this radio and this traffic noise and the people clattering in the kitchen, you say there's no noise. So what we think of as background noise and can ignore a person with dementia can't. Now that's just one of the 10 ideas. And there's more ideas in there. Later on we can talk about other things, but agitation often caused by fatigue, by difficulty in explaining what your problem is. There's a whole range of things you can think about for dealing with those. So we'll do more of that later, but we'll just focus on what comes next. This was the next little book that we produced, which is called 10 Hints for Design at Home, because some of the things that were causing people problems, and sound could be one of the ones that is helped by design, some of the things are caused by design. A person with dementia sometimes can be helped more by just increasing the light level in the place where they stay than by medication. The light level is absolutely crucial for a person with dementia. Do you remember what we said? You might have difficulty in working things out. Sometimes when you have difficulty working things out, it's better if you can see. Now, I'm not going to name the hotel I'm staying in here in your beautiful city. It's a very nice hotel, but they do like purple. It's a very dark purple, and they do like their black slate floors, and I'm stumbling about there as if I need a white stick. Now, the reason why that seems a bit dark to me is because at my age, I know I look very youthful, but I have reached an age, in middle age, where for all of us, you start getting yellowing of your lens in your eye, yellowing of your eye. So it's as if you're wearing yellow shades all the time, as if you're wearing yellow sunglasses. So the person who's designing an environment for a person with dementia, if you're one of these young 40-year-olds, what you need to do is go and look at your lighting environment with a pair of sunglasses on so you can see what it looks like to a person as old as me. You need twice as much light at my age as you would at the age of 40, although that was just a couple of years ago. But the really important thing is to be aware of the fact that in the absence of light, the person's more likely to fall, they can't see the signage, they can't see where things are. Dementia sometimes gives depth perception problems, so when the person puts their cup down in the wrong place, it's because they can't see, they can't register where the edge of the table is, or difference between the wall and the floor. So there's a whole lot of hints in there where design can help reduce anxiety, and it can increase the capacity of the person with dementia to be able to care for themselves and to avoid the kind of adverse incidents that will have them ending up in hospital, which, as we said, is a really important thing to avoid. Once they're in there, there's things you can do to make it better, but it's really important to avoid. So the ideas that were in these two books are some of the ideas that were incorporated in the one-stop guide and that are in this book here. So if people like to read, there's a book. But if you're not the kind of person who's keen on book reading and you've got access to the internet, not on mobile devices at the moment, because this is just on an ordinary computer, you can access this. You can go on the website of the University of Stirling, and there you'll see two things that are called virtual environments. And really they're each like a photograph of lots of different rooms, either in a house or in a hospital. And when you bring up that picture, you see there's lots of little information dots on the picture. And as you're sitting with it in your computer, you can roll your mouse around the image, and when you hit one of these dots, I'm not doing that live here tonight because that would be too complicated for me and it would all not work. I sometimes do talks in church halls and things where you end up where you're just waving your arms around because even the electricity isn't working. So I'm not doing anything fancy with the internet. But if you go on the website, you can click on here, and this is an example of what would happen. A window will open up, a little page will open up, and it will tell you what the reason is for the design under that particular image. And then further down in the website, there's research evidence, like people with double-barreled names with great big long papers that have been published in journals that nobody really looks at, except people like me who love that kind of thing. But it really starts off with, here is what you can try, and it works its way down to where there is evidence. But the evidence thing is really, really difficult, because if you're trying to get evidence on what works with people with dementia, that's quite complicated for reasons that I'll describe in a minute. So I think this is dead useful. And there's a kitchen in there with examples of things that you could do in your kitchen. Does anybody want to ask me about anything to do with the kitchen while it's there? I'm sure you've all got dementia-friendly kitchens. One of the things that's really good about this kitchen is you don't have to remember where anything is. Your plates are out on display, or they're behind glass-fronted cupboards. If you haven't got that in your kitchen, you just have to take the cupboard door off, just easy. And then in some places where it's hard to take the cupboard door off, you just put a picture of what's inside. I mean, it's not rocket science, but sometimes you just need that little bit of an idea about what would make a difference. When I was in France recently visiting a furniture manufacturer who's asked for advice on a dementia-friendly range of furniture, we had a whole, absolutely teeming with ideas of things that we're going to be able to do to help make the furniture right so that it works well for people with dementia. And they had something which I'm sure you've seen, which is where the worktop, that's this bit here, which with the cooker top, actually moves up and down so that it can be the right height for the person, and if they end up needing to sit, because frailty is something that comes with dementia. There's masses of stuff that you can get, assistive technology, that helps. And then there's also an example of a bathroom. So this is the bit about the research. You remember the stuff about the red wine and the champagne, right? So I don't believe the red wine research, even though that research was done on humans, yeah? And the champagne research has only been done on rats, but it's good enough for me. And what I mean to illustrate is that just because somebody finds a research result, it doesn't negate all the previous research that it seems to contradict. And just because you've seen a result presented, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's significant. The way universities work at the moment is that the university is measured for its quality on the basis of the impact it has from its research. So there's a kind of perverse incentive for them to take any piece of research and maximise the extent to which it's published, even if the scientists themselves are saying, oh no, it's too soon to say that. We don't have that conclusion. There's a whole pressure to do it. And when you think of the fact that the journalists, as I said before, are quite often people who they're very short-staffed, they don't have time to analyse things. So a story can go from the researcher through to the paper that's sitting there in your newsagent and you're reading the result, and nobody at any point has said, wait a minute, is this true? Wait a minute, is this logical? And so the research evidence is really difficult to sort through. And that's why when I'd finished writing the book, when the family were about to come back and my parents had stopped checking the grammar and language, when I got to that stage, I felt a bit guilty because there's nothing in the book that you couldn't find on the internet, because I made sure that I checked it, I made sure it was available. And then I comforted myself with the fact that you would actually have to spend 6 weeks and probably be a professor of dementia studies to be able to make sense of what was on the internet. So I was quite pleased that a number of the myths about dementia I was able to bust, I was able to sort through them. But in terms of the research, there are 3 levels of research for in the book and for dementia-related things. And the first thing is where there's been research done truly on people with dementia, and there's very little of that, because it's hard to find people who've only got dementia and not anything else. There needs to be a completely new paradigm for research on people with dementia. Excuse me. One example of that was the research that showed that people with dementia will walk more swiftly and safely over a smooth, matte, unpatterned surface. If you start having patterns, the person with dementia seems more likely to fall over. If you have a shiny floor surface, hospitals love to have lovely, polished, shiny surfaces. The person with dementia may misunderstand the glare from there and think that the floor is wet. And I'm sure in Canada you sometimes have to try and walk on ice. And you know what it's like, you change your gait, it isn't your normal gait, and you're actually more likely to fall over when you change your gait than if you just walk with a normal gait. So that's research that was certainly done involving people with dementia. The second level of research is extrapolation from sensory and physical impairment. So you presume that the person with dementia is probably going to have some eye problems, some physical problems. They're going to be older, they're going to be frail, and so you've got to assume that your environment and the things that you do are going to help with that. And then the third level is something called international consensus. Now, because I'm an international expert, that basically means anything I think is cool. So there's one example, because eating and drinking is hugely important for people with dementia, and there's an example in the book here of some research that was done by one of my colleagues in France. And he was really concerned that people with dementia in care homes weren't eating and drinking properly. So he introduced this absolutely novel idea, which was, and I might not have the exact time, but I think it was the 2-hour lunch time. So you know what people in France are like, entrée, plat principal, fromage, dessert, café. If the staff were pushed for time, they could go and have their lunch and come back and the people were still eating, We just made it that lunch was... And he measured the total weight of all the people in the care home at the start and the total weight of all the people in the care home at the end, and they'd all got fatter. What's not to love? It's really, really good. So that hasn't been tested on lots and lots and lots of people, but it has a ring of truth about it. And so just using those examples of international best practice that we've seen is quite good. The other thing that seems to work really well is assistive technology, and there's a book that you can download from the dementia site at the Dementia Centre with ideas of simple technology that can make a difference for people with dementia. You'll be familiar with locator devices where the person can have a bracelet which, so for example, if my dad had this bracelet on, I would be able to, with my mobile phone, trace his whereabouts and be able to see where he was at any time. I could even set an alert so I didn't have to keep watching, so that my phone would beep if he went across a certain boundary. There are lots of other examples of assistive technology. Do you use assistive technology much here to support people with dementia? I'm asking Susan a little bit.
It's growing.
It's growing. What's the most popular thing at the moment, Susan?
I have to say there's not one.
There's not one,
Yeah.
okay. One of my favourite ones is something called Just Checking. And what you have is a sensory device in your living room, your kitchen, your bathroom, your bedroom. And it's not like having a camera on you at home, but it's a movement sensor. So I could, on my mobile phone or on my computer, if I had this in my dad's house, say my dad in Scotland, I had it there now, I could flip it open right now and I would be able to see that he'd moved a bit in the kitchen and then he'd moved a bit in the bathroom and then he'd gone into the bedroom and there wasn't much movement. And then a number of hours came along and then he's in the bathroom again and back out. And I could set alerts so that if he went to the bathroom between say 9 o'clock at night and 9 in the morning and stayed for longer than half an hour, my phone would go and say, you better ring Dad because he's not moving in a place that he would normally not stay for more than a few minutes. And if I was here in Canada, I could make it that his neighbour got the alert just for the couple of days so that she could keep an eye on him while I'm here. So this is a simple piece of equipment that's available commercially. You can rent it. There's loads and loads of equipment like that, and we can talk about more of that later if people want to. So this was a book that we produced that had some really simple ideas. One of the things that I notice here is that lots of people live in apartments or condominiums, you call them, condos. So if somebody upstairs starts filling up the bath and forgets and the water all comes through, is that ever an accident that people have where they get flooding and the poor lady gets moved out because she keeps flooding the people downstairs? There's a really simple thing called a Magi plug, and the Magi plug is just a sink plug, and when the water pressure reaches a certain level, it just automatically drains. And so you lose all your water, but on the other hand you don't lose your tenancy because you kept flooding the people downstairs. So there are lots of examples there of assistive technology, some of them very simple and cheap, some of them more expensive, but getting less expensive all the time and easy to use. Near Stirling, we had somebody recently who he liked to walk in the hills, and he went up in the hills and he just never came back. And as soon as you know that somebody is likely to wander, it's really, really important to get them a locator device so you will always know where you are, because the alternative is locking them up. I'd rather be free range and be able to be hauled back when required than to be locked up in case I would get lost. And there's a really good website called AT Dementia, which has lots of examples of this kind of machinery and the cost and the suppliers. It's based in the UK, but you would soon be able to find the North American suppliers. One of my other favourite assistive technology devices is to do with eating and drinking. Eating and drinking is hugely important in dementia, and people lose their appetite and become frail. And it's a thing called the ode. And the ode is, and I know you must have them here, those things you plug in the wall and they make your house smell of, winter forest. Yeah, like no winter forest I've ever smelled, but that's what they say. You can actually get one which will puff out the smell of food. And the science has shown that the smell of food that, in the UK that makes people most hungry is the smell of something called a Bakewell tart. Does anybody here know Bakewell tart? So apparently the smell of Bakewell tart makes you really hungry, even if what you're about to get is onion soup. It just makes you want to eat. And so you have this machine with a timer, and 30 minutes before the woman comes with the Meals on Wheels, it gives a puff of the smell, and the person, by the time the lady comes with Meals on Wheels, he's snatching the food after and eating it ravenously, whereas we know a lot of people would take the food and throw it in the bin because they're just not hungry. So there's lots of bits of machinery which help with that. So stress and distress, the sorts of things that can cause agitation. And in the book, there's lots of help and understanding on how to step into other people's worlds, and examination of some of the things that cause stress and distress. And I know you've had a lecture here on delirium recently, but depression and pain, medication, these can cause the kind of behaviours that are difficult for people to manage at home. And these were going back to the book that we had before, these were the main things that people said that they had problems with. So rather than spending too much time lecturing at you, I think I want to keep coming back to people asking me questions about these particular things. One of the ones that always appeals to me is the question of sleeplessness. People with dementia often turn night into day, and that's an absolute nightmare for people who are trying to live with them in the same house. It's tricky enough in a care home. And certainly here in the book, we've got lots of examples of things that you can do to help people sleep at night. And you remember that one of the things I said about design was that light levels were really important. It's terribly important for a person with dementia to get exposure to daylight. That's something that doesn't often happen in some of the lifestyles that people lead. If you're changing it in someone's own home, the thing to do is pull back the curtains as far as possible, clean the windows, take vegetation away from around the windows and make sure that they get exposure to daylight where they can. But particularly if they're not sleeping, exposure to daylight in the early part of the day can help set the diurnal rhythm back into its normal rhythm. Now, I'm a tiny bit jet lagged just now. Where I come from, it's now 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was just there 36, 48 hours ago, so, I'm feeling a bit weird. And it's because of chemicals in my body that are doing the wrong things at the wrong time. I'm hungry at the wrong time. If it's too much detail, I need to pee at the wrong time. My blood pressure and my temperature are happening at the wrong time. And the thing that makes all those things work properly most of the time is a hormone in my body called melatonin. And the melatonin thing makes me sleepy at night, and it's part of setting the rhythm. Now, because of that, you can actually buy melatonin for jet lag. Has anybody here ever bought it for jet lag? Yeah, some people have. You can't buy it in the UK. I have to buy mine at Hong Kong Airport. Would you trust a woman who says she buys drugs at Hong Kong Airport? But it's in the pharmacy there. So the thing about the melatonin is it's reduced in older people, and it's even more reduced in people with dementia. And so what you want to do is maximise the value of the melatonin that there is, and you want to metabolise it in the right way. And it is metabolised by light of a certain frequency falling into your eye. Now remember, those eyes have got yellow goggles on. So it's the kind of light that is most available out of doors earlier in the day. And it's also the kind of light that comes actually from your computer screen. Have you got this thing here where you're telling kids they must not watch their computer an hour before bedtime because it wakes you up? If I wake up in the night and I want to know what time it is, I'm always really annoyed if I have to look at my phone to find the time, because that's the blue light that will wake me up. It's really nice if you get a nice red alarm clock in the corner just blinking. 4 a.m, go back to sleep, If it says 4 a.m. and I've got the screen in front of me, it just seems to wake me up completely. So there are things you can do to reduce the extent to which people are going to be awake at night, and exercise during the day helps. These are just common sense things, but my other favourite one is that in care homes, have all the staff wear pyjamas and dressing gowns at night, and in hospital if possible, because if I wake up and I see you standing there in a uniform, I'm going to start issuing orders, telling you what to do, because the old matron in me is going to come out. But if I see you in your pyjamas, because I'm naturally polite, and you say, shh, go back to bed, don't wake everybody up, I will go back to my room and go back to bed, because I'll realise I'm committing a faux pas, So simple things like that make a real difference to whether or not people turn night into day. And there's research evidence for it. That's the other thing about the book. There's not lots of footnotes and research, but if anybody finds anything in there and they say, what is the research evidence? I don't believe this isn't in accordance with the research. All the email contact details are there. Email me, and if I can't give you the research evidence for it, I'll take it out the next edition of the book. It's really, really important that we make sure what we do is based on research insofar as we can. Okay, so anybody want to ask me about any of the other things on the list here? Wandering. Somebody just said a really rude word. Now, in the world of dementia care, wandering is not an acceptable term. My colleague in Australia, who's an expert on this, Elizabeth Beattie, calls it unwanted exiting. But she's really clever, because she has analysed all the reasons why people do this, going away and you weren't expecting them to, and in ways that might take them into danger. She's analysed why they do it, what the patterns are, and what you can do about it. So it's great. So she's allowed to set the rules about what it's called. But I always call it wandering, because that's what families call it. So wandering, what can you do about wandering? Sometimes when people are describing wandering, the person is moving about, and we have a motto in our house which says, not all who wander are lost. The person is moving about and you've got no idea why it is they're doing what they're doing. So that's why you think they're wandering, but actually they have a very clear purpose in mind. So when the person is agitated and wandering in that way, the first and most important thing is to try and find out what the problem is. And you can see patterns. Sometimes people do it at a certain time of day, and so you could assume that they're going somewhere they used to go at that time. Sometimes people do it when they're agitated. And what happens with the agitated behaviour is sometimes you can explain it like this. If you've ever done a lot of exams, once the exam is over, you wake up the next morning and you feel worried and you can't remember what you're worried about. You think, there must be something I'm supposed to be worried about. And then you realise the exams are over and you relax again. Has anybody ever had that kind of experience? Where there's a woman at the back just put her hands up. That's good. So we have this experience. So what happens sometimes is you feel worried, physiologically worried, because the chemicals in your body and in your brain are making you worried, and you intellectually try and work out what it is you're worried about, and you attribute it to something. And so sometimes when you get an old lady who says, I need to go out and go to the school gate to collect my kids, what she's worried, she's agitated about something, and she's searching to think, what can it be? And she's picking something that she would normally have been worried about, and she's just not quite making the connection. And so when you've got someone who's wandering in the sense of trying to get out, trying to exit in a way that is not wanted, then fundamentally finding out what it is that's bothering them and finding a way of dealing with that is really quite an important thing to do. But in the discussions with the police that I've had when people with dementia have gone missing, one of the things we quite often discover is that the person who has gone missing and has been missing now for a couple of days is someone who their family already knew. They'd already had some false alarms. And what the family hadn't done at that point was put in place the best techniques for this particular situation, so that as soon as you know that your dad is someone who's going to disappear, the thing you have to do is make sure you've got a photograph of him, a current photograph of him. We've mostly all got mobile phones. Take a picture of him every morning, because that's really handy, because apart from anything else, you've got a picture of what he was wearing that day. Now, he might not live where you live, but if it's at all humanly possible, that's a thing you can usefully do, because all you do is email that to the cops and say, I seem to have mislaid my dad in this, blue shirt and green trousers. Crime against fashion, but, we need him back. The other thing that you can do is, as soon as you know that the person's likely to do it, or as soon as you know yourself that you're likely to do it, to voluntarily agree to be wearing a locator device of the kind that I described before. So a locator device, which means you can buy to these, or you can subscribe to a service, and that means that I can be allowed to go wherever I want, because I will always be found again. And by the time I have dementia, which hopefully won't be for another 20 years or so, by the time I have dementia, I'm sure these will be subcutaneous. They'll just chip you like we've chipped our Wastie. It'll have a locator device in there. We already have the technology, people can do it, it's just there are ethical issues and all the rest of it. So the location. Yes, sir?
My cat has GPS in it. Why
You-
can't it, my cat has a GPS collar.
Yeah.
Why can't we make that kind of thing for Alzheimer's people, so when they wander, you know exactly where they are? Is that not a feasible thing, or what is it?
So are you saying he has a
I know
has he got, no, just describe for me, a subcutaneous thing or a collar?
it's implanted.
It's implanted. Well, that's exactly what I've said I want to have when the time comes. Now, we have the technology, but nobody's manufacturing it at the moment. And there's an ethical issue there, because I can say now to my daughter, who is my power of attorney, that if such a thing ever becomes commercially available, I consent to you doing that to me. And, you can have as much written permission as you like, and so that could happen. The difficulty would be in doing that to somebody who can't consent. And at the moment, even with the less contentious locator devices, there's always a huge, as we call it in Scotland, stooshy, whenever someone wants to use it. The newspaper stories, one of the newspaper stories that I quote in the book, is where a local police department, who were finding they were spending huge amounts of time regularly locating the same people with dementia who'd gone AWOL, offered to buy some locator devices for the families to use. And the whole newspaper story was about it being like tagging criminals. And that was total misunderstanding of it. So you can see where the misunderstanding is there. So if you're interested in it, I'm sure there will be a university somewhere that has a prototype model that would be happy for you to be chipped like your cat. But just at the moment, it's not something that's available commercially. There's a gentleman at the front.
Are antidepressants helpful for those who are depressed with dementia?
Are antidepressants helpful? Okay, so there's been some really good research done on antidepressants by Professor Shubhi Banerjee, who at that time was in a university in London. He's moved London, England. He's moved away from that university now. And what he discovered was that if you compare antidepressants with what we think of as a talking cure, there is no great advantage of antidepressants over the talking cure. But what he was quite clear about was people with dementia do get depressed, and that depression must be treated. So if it's in the absence of anything else, the medication, then if the medication is working, that's a good idea. One of the reasons why anybody would have reservations about medication for depression in an old person who has dementia is that once you're really old, having too many medications, I'm holding up my 4 fingers because 4 is the maximum I think people should have, because you start getting interactions, and many medicines also are tested on younger people, so you're not sure exactly what an older person with compromised liver or kidney function, how well they're going to metabolize it. So that was a really long answer, so let's answer it simply.
This is a 90-year-old who's had a history of depression.
Mm-hmm.
And lives in a wonderful place. It's an absolute wonderful
Mm-hmm.
place here in London, but has one of those doctors that is attached but doesn't come to the home except once a month,
Mm-hmm.
and is a nihilist, as you said, a nihilist doctor, like you said would help.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you and I can have a private conversation about an individual case, and I'll just say some general points just now about it. So if someone is in a care home and you feel that they're not getting best medical care, I'm sure my colleagues from the Alzheimer's Society would be able to advise you how to do it in this part of the world, but there is almost universally an opportunity to get a second opinion about care, particularly about things like prescribing. It certainly is the case that many doctors might have a very good reason for reducing the number of medications that an old person is having, because too many is bad for them. So I'm saying that on weighing in on the side of the doctor who wants to reduce it. A care home that has an attached doctor who's nihilistic about dementia is really fishing in the wrong end of the pond, because, to be honest, our research in care homes in Scotland indicates that 90% of the residents have dementia. So, and the length of time that people are staying in care homes is getting shorter and shorter. It's closer to the end of life. So a time will come when a care home is more or less like a hospice for people with dementia. It's where you go when you're really poorly and frail and you really need looking after 24 hours. So any doctor who's focusing on that particular group of patients really needs to have a deep understanding, not only of the patient, but how to help the family understand that he or she is doing the best for them. So if you've got the impression that anybody who's looking after a person with dementia is just doing something because they're nihilistic, that's quite a complex problem and probably one we could discuss on the side. Yes?
Could you speak to a patient, our mother, 87-year-old retired nurse, who's in denial about her depression and her dementia, and keeps asking us to tell her why we think she's depressed, and denies that she's been told about her dementia?
So again, really complicated one, and I'd like to discuss it in general principles rather than specifically about your mum. See, nurses when they get old, they're terrible. I'm practicing now. You're a nurse too, right? So, you know what you're in for, don't you? You know what you're in for. So, but putting that little bit of prejudice to one side about nurses. There's also the thing about person with dementia denying that you've ever told them something. We sometimes call that forgetting. We say they forget, But actually, it's really a disability in learning. You know how the nurse in the hospital says, oh, she keeps forgetting to use her call system. It's not that the woman forgot to use her call system. She never learned. You know, she never called anybody in her life. It's only the Queen of England who calls people by pressing a button. You know, so when she gets dementia and is in hospital, she can have as many buttons to press as she likes. But your average old lady would call somebody by shouting for them, or if she was brought up in the house I was brought up in, you weren't allowed to shout, you were told to go and find them. So I'll be the old lady who keeps getting out of bed to find people, and I'll be getting into trouble, particularly if I find them in uniform and start bossing them around. So there is a real problem about an old person saying, you never told me and I never had, because you can't work out whether it's denial or whether they just haven't learned that's what happened. And so people with depression sometimes go into denial and refuse treatment and won't take part. So if you've got two conditions that someone has and they're in denial and they won't take part in the treatment process or the support process, that's really difficult. With dementia, it certainly is the case that someone can often reach the point where they no longer have capacity to make decisions for themselves. And so there I'll be saying, well, I don't have dementia, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm just going to go and do this and do that. And the person I've given power of attorney to will actually be able to say, I'm sorry, but June is making rash decisions on these things, and as power of attorney I'm going to step in and make the decisions. So sometimes when you've got a person with dementia you can do that. But you must always remember that capacity is a wide-ranging thing, so it might be the stage where I shouldn't be allowed to decide about my own stocks and shares, if I ever had any, which I've never had, but it's the example we always use, you know. Can't decide about selling my house or something big, but I can still decide that I'm going to go on holiday or go on roller skates or do lots of things that you might think were unwise. A person with dementia can make unwise decisions as much as they like, and maybe refusing to be treated for depression is an unwise decision, but it's just tough on you, you know, you're just going to have to watch me being depressed. So it's not a simple, this is what you do when that happens, and it's your interpretation that this is denial isn't necessarily the right interpretation. And it's one of the things that people often ask me about dementia. They say, should I go into dementia care? And I say, not unless you're really, really prepared to deal with some very, very difficult problems, because it's just not simple. It used to be that they thought that nurses who went into the dementia, or doctors who went into the dementia field, were the people who couldn't be a brain surgeon, or who couldn't be, brain surgery is a piece of cake compared with dealing with complicated family issues to do with money and issues to do with citizenship and human rights. Really, really complicated issues. So, but if that doesn't help, email me and I'll see if I can have another go with more detail. Yeah. Yes, there's a lady there.
I have 3 questions, so I don't know if you want to answer any of them or all of them or whatever. The first one was on the link between, or suspected link between type 2 diabetes and dementia. The next one was on polypharmacy and dehydration, particularly in seniors, and how that can sort of manifest as dementia symptoms and maybe gets diagnosed too quickly without that intervention. And the third one is, what could you tell us about telomeres, for the telomeres research in dementia?
About the telomeres, right, okay. So I'll start with the third question, because that's the easy one. I can't tell you about the telomeres research in dementia, that's outside my area of expertise, and I'm sure you'll be able to get someone along who'll be able to talk about that in great detail. Go back to the next one back, which is the one about dehydration. Is the memory problem for me. So the dehydration issue is, just for anyone else in the audience, the fuel for your brain is oxygen, and oxygen is carried by blood. And the blood supply is often compromised in people who have dementia and older people. And so the more fluid you have, the better your brain is going to work. It's really important to stay hydrated. And we even understand this now better with children at school. When I was at school, if you'd asked for a glass of water in the classroom, you would have been told off. Whereas now children are encouraged to bring water into classroom because hydration is seen as being really important. And hydration is, of course, therefore very important in older people and people with dementia. One of the difficult issues, for example, in hospital, where the temperature is very high, or in care homes, or apparently anywhere in London, Ontario, the temperature is very high, it's sometimes very difficult to keep people hydrated because they're dehydrating very quickly. And of course, if you're old, and you mentioned polypharmacy, if you're older and your liver and kidneys aren't working like they used to, and you're dehydrated, then your medicines aren't going to work the way they should. And when your medicines don't work the way they should, then you're much more likely to become delirious. And you had a lecture about delirium recently. And the thing about delirium is it's a form of confusion which is reversible. It looks very like dementia, but it's reversible, but it doesn't reverse really quickly. And I had a conversation recently with a man and his wife. Now, her mother was admitted to an acute hospital, and she was diagnosed as having dementia while she was there. And as happens in the United Kingdom, she went to a care home with her dementia, and her house was sold from under her to pay for the care home. And then 6 months later, she came out of the delirium, because it had been delirium all the time and not dementia. And when she came out of the delirium, she said, well, I'd like to go home. And they said, well, sorry, your home's not there anymore. And she said, well, give me the money and I'll buy another one. And they said, no, your money's all been spent on paying for this 6 months in a care home. So the misdiagnosis of delirium, the mistaken diagnosis of delirium, is a real problem and can have tragic outcomes. The other thing is people who have delirium die within 6 months quite often. And so what you have, for example, when I gave the example of people not getting well in the acute hospital, the thing that would go wrong in the acute hospital, for example, with a fractured neck of femur, the research shows is that if you've got a broken hip that's replaced, in hospital you get much less pain relief given to you if you have dementia than if you don't have dementia. It seems really weird that people with dementia get less pain control. And it's partly to do with the way the nurses and the doctors administer it. Because what happens is you're given a basic dose and then someone will come and say, have you got any pain, and give you some more. Well, if I went to this lady, Susan, sitting here in the front and said, are you in pain? She thinks she's at the golf club. She doesn't know who I am. She wonders why I'm asking her a stupid question when she's actually in agony. And she just says no to make me go away. So she continues to be in pain. And the recipe of a bit of dementia, plus pain, plus delirium, that kind of thing just is a recipe for the person getting ill and dying. And so that's why, one of the reasons why the care of people with dementia in acute hospital is really important. And if there's one thing you can do to support them, it would be to make sure that they have plenty of water. I did a review of some Welsh hospitals a year or so ago, and one of the things that's happened since then is that they've really revised their hydration policy in the hospital. In fact, I can't do the Welsh accent, but in the report when we went for the follow-up, one Welsh lady said, if somebody offers me another so-and-so drink, I'm going to float right out of this ward. And we made it that doctors, for example, if a junior doctor is actually going to interview a patient, they should have a glass of water with them and give them a sip in between each thing. Because people say the nurses don't have time to give people water. Well, everybody else can give them water. Even the consultant can give them water. So I hope that has answered some of your questions. Polypharmacy, I know it's a random number, 4, to say that 4 is enough of any medicine, but you still see people with dementia in care homes being medicated for things that probably don't matter anymore. Sorry, this lady.
Just one quick question. Because it's often an older population or residents in care homes, and you have often other comorbidities, including swallowing issues.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have someone who's on thickened fluid, and you can't drink thickened fluids the same way you would drink a glass of water, so often it's just zipping it just to wet the mouth, but it wouldn't really give you the hydration other fluids would. So how can you address that issue best, just to ensure that someone on thickened fluid get the hydration they need?
Now, are you speaking from a professional point of view? Are you a dietitian or a...
I'm a physio, and I happen to work in a home care
Right.
for Alzheimer's.
And do you have a protocol for hydrating people who are on thickened fluids?
No, because I'm just a visiting physio, so that's why I'm asking. Just how can you ensure that? You've seen it in the hospital and in this care home, that people don't like the thickened fluids.
They
So
don't like them.
They don't like them so that there's zip on them, but you know it's not giving the same hydration as juice or coffee or tea.
Right. And so this is a really interesting, if I just analyse this problem, it's almost like a logical problem. So the logical problem is this, here am I in hospital and I'm not very good at swallowing. So instead of giving me ordinary trickly water to drink, they give me something that's thicker, like a gel to drink. And if they didn't give me fluids at all, if I drank the water, some of the water would go the wrong way into my lungs and I would get pneumonia and possibly die.
Hospital where you don't want to be.
Okay, so the alternative is they give me thickened fluids and I become dehydrated and get delirium and die. Okay, I think you just flip a coin, don't you? I mean, to place this on me as a question really illustrates the horrible dilemma that you have, and I have huge sympathy for you. So it's something that is a typical problem of care of people with dementia in hospital, which is examined in chapter 13 in the book. Because the way the health system and the social care system is divided up, lots of professionals are responsible for one little bit. So my name is Anne and I'm responsible for infection control. So you cannot have any curtains or any furnishings in here, right? And so you get people with dementia who are kept in really unstimulating environments. There was a group of men who I went to visit who were supposed to be aggressive, and when I went in the room they all ran towards me. And everybody was very nervous, but I was the nearest thing to a well-upholstered sofa they'd seen in a long time. and they were also described as being sexually predatory, and all they wanted to do was cuddle, you know. But you know, whoever was in charge of infection control, that's a better one, infection control had said, no. And then you get the next person who comes in who's responsible for health and safety, and you say these men are not sleeping at night and they're not getting enough exercise and they're not getting enough daylight, and there's a beautiful garden out there but the door is locked, and they say, oh, health and safety says if they go in the garden they might fall. So they either go in the garden and fall and might die, or they stay inside and get agitated and delirious and might die. But each individual person is only responsible for one element. I'm only responsible for health and safety or infection control or this, and whoever's responsible for swallowing, which is probably the speech and language therapist, says, you know, my rules say she can only have thickened fluids and I'm not going to allow her to have the other thing, and if she gets dehydrated it's not my problem, you know, because I was being safe. So that's where your role as a relative of a person with dementia, or as a person with dementia yourself, or a friend, your role is really crucial, because you're the only person who can pull all the threads together and say, as a power of attorney, I'm prepared to risk my mother having a glass of water and a piece of toast. She might choke, but that's our decision. That's what she can have. Rather than having people making sure that it's not their fault. It's almost like, and it's not that I'm blaming those people, because you would get into horrible trouble if you allowed something to happen. So someone has to take responsibility. And the way the health and social care system is run, it's like accountability lotto. If you're the one who decided she could have fluids, then you're the one who's going to be struck off and never work again. So it's a real dilemma. And I think the solution is the individual person in the family to take an interest and be in charge. And sometimes that's hard. It's very hard. You're standing there in front of the professionals saying, this is what I want you to do, and they say, we can't. And you hold up your form and you say, I have power of attorney and I'm telling you this is what you have to do, and they say, we can't. And you just have to keep going until you find someone who can. Yes?
I have a question about sleep. I was actually running a support group this afternoon, and a gentleman was talking about his wife, who sleeps a tremendous amount of the time. And then you also hear from other people that their sleep-wake cycle is completely messed up, so they're sleeping in the daytime and not sleeping at night. And then I've also come across people who report that there just is very little sleep of any kind. And so I have all these different little stories, and I've never been able to sort out, it seems to vary from person to person. So I just would be interested in your thoughts on what causes problems with sleep, and is it normal for like this lady this afternoon, who just sleeps 20 hours out of 24.
Okay, I think you answered your own question already, which is to say everyone is different. So every single person is different. And so what causes different sleep patterns? Sometimes people, I'm conscious of an echo, sometimes people would sleep more if sleep hygiene was, that's the word they use for sleep hygiene, was performed. So for sleep hygiene, we're biologically designed so that we will sleep when it's dark. And so if you're trying to sleep in a place where there are lights on all the time, you're less likely to sleep. Even moonlight can make you more wakeful. We're also biologically designed to be alert when there's a noise. So if you're trying to sleep in a place where there's extraneous noise, your sleep will be disturbed. People's sleep patterns can be affected by what they eat and drink. So, I mean, this is all just common sense about, about sleep, about why people sleep less. I spoke before about the disruption in the diurnal rhythm because of the reduction in melatonin circulating in the bodies of older people. And when you find people who want to sleep all the time, sometimes it's because they're just frail, they're old and frail. The frailty issue is something that we don't expect, we don't think about it, but it just is the case when you get old. You have unexpected or unplanned weight loss, you have more muscle weakness, your immune system is reduced, so you're more likely to get infections. You're just tired and frail, and so maybe some people, when they get like that, they just sleep a lot. So if the sleep pattern is a problem, that's when you have to investigate what it is that's causing it, too much or too little. What medication is this person on? Is she being drugged up? That's why it's important sometimes to know what kind of dementia the person's got. Because if someone's got Lewy body dementia and somebody's given them some antipsychotic medication, they just go stiff as a board and don't move. I mean, they really, really stop moving. And oftentimes they die quite soon after that. So I don't have the one answer. I've got lots of answers in the book about if somebody's not sleeping and you really want them to sleep, here are some ideas, not including just tying them to the bed and locking the door. It's just sometimes people are driven mad by having somebody who's not sleeping. But sleeping too much isn't something that I would have expertise on, but if the person was worried, they really should see their doctor to make sure it's not something to do with medication or some underlying illness that you want to do something about. So that was a really good question. So I think we're nearly done with the questions then. I'm just going to see whether there are any more slides, were there? Oh, there we are. It says you can ask me any question. Yeah, so you can ask me questions. You can email me on my iCloud account. And there's another lady coming with a question. Oh no, she's not. She's coming to fix the microphone. The website there is where the DSDC things, and if the answer's not in the book, blame Judy Dench. She probably distracted me. No, honestly, I can't begin to tell you how grateful we are for the support that she has given, and just lending her name to something can get a big audience. So we absolutely love her for this, yes. And there's another question.
Let's throw one more in that quite often with Alzheimer's patients, my father took it. He went to a lawyer.
Went to her.
He was a lawyer
Uh-huh.
and a gold digger and sort of dragged him in there. The two lawyers made up a pact. He did not have legal assistance. They did not make sure he had legal assistance. They did not contact the individual in charge of his well-being, this is in Alberta.
Yeah.
And therefore, things just happen. But I don't understand really, in essence, why there isn't something in the legal profession that says, this guy's gone, he's out of it. And why they're not forced to take consideration that they can't make a contract. But they did.
Okay, so this is a really interesting question. In America, in the US, there's an organisation called the ARP, the American Association for Retired People, is what it used to be called, and they're taking a particular interest right now in the financial abuse of older people in general and people with dementia. And the Alzheimer's Society of Canada and other Alzheimer's societies around the world take a real interest in this form of abuse because we know that it happens and there are ways in which it can happen. Of all the people in the world who should be careful about financially abusing an old person, it would be a licensed medical practitioner, because you are so going to lose your license to practice if you're discovered to have committed fraud and abuse of a person. And one thing that would by definition be abuse and fraud would be getting a person who lacks capacity to enter into a legal contract. And it's really, I know that's a serious story, but here's one that's almost amusing. A minister of religion came to me recently to say that he wanted to marry a man with dementia to his long-standing girlfriend partner because the man had got dementia and they'd always meant to marry and they hadn't got around to doing it. And we turned ourselves inside out trying to find ways in which they could get married, but of course they could not marry because he did not have the capacity to enter into that contract willingly. And it didn't matter that his power of attorney knew that he wanted to marry her, that she wanted to marry him. There was all sorts of reasons that it wasn't about protecting him from a gold digger or anything else. It was just that you cannot enter into that legal contract of marriage if you are not, if you don't have capacity. And, you know, the thing about marriage is you can get out of it. It's not easy, it's expensive, but you can get out of it. But, you know, to go into a contract that you can't get out of, like, the, you know, disposal of property or something like that, you can't get that back once you've done it. That's an even more binding or irreversible contract. You just cannot enter into those contracts if you lack capacity, and if a legal person knowingly tried to impose a contract like that on someone who lacked capacity, then they're dicing with their registration. It's just not allowed. It's against the law. So it gets tricky though when we experience this in the UK, where a woman says, I think my dad's now losing capacity, and she goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, no, it needs to be the lawyer that decides that. She goes to the lawyer, and the lawyer says, no, that's a medical decision. So she's going back and forth between the two. Obviously there has to be a sensible discussion, but the criteria that you use are quite simple. Can the person make a decision? Can they remember that they made that decision? Do they understand that decision? These are the things that are the simple methods that are used to decide whether or not someone has capacity to make decisions. So it's really important. But power of attorney really helps, because then they have to do it through the power of attorney, and that person, if you've picked the right one, is not going to allow anything bad to happen. Yes.
I'm not sure if you have time for this, but one of the questions from this lady was, is there a connection between Alzheimer's and stage 2 diabetes?
I forgot. I'm really sorry. You should have shouted at me for forgetting that. That was just purely so. So the thing about diabetes is there absolutely is seen to be a connection between people having dementia and a whole range of other conditions. So depression, previous head injury, blood pressure problems, a whole range of conditions, including diabetes, where there seems to be an association. I was horrified recently because someone said there was also an association between rosacea, which I have, and dementia. So there is an association between these things. One of the things that we know is that with most of those conditions, if you're able to manage the condition, it reduces the connection between the underlying condition and the dementia. So untreated depression is more likely to be problematic, and out of control diabetes is more likely to be problematic. And recently, there's been some research in the UK that indicates that the increase of people with dementia is not going up as fast as we had predicted. It's still increasing, but it's almost like it's decelerating a little bit. And we think that that's probably because those underlying conditions are now being managed better. We've got better vascular health, we've got better management of diabetes. So even though there's a connection between them, if you're affected by one of these conditions, lifestyle changes that control that condition reduce the extent to which you would be susceptible. And a really extreme example of this was a lady I met in the United States who was sadly one of 5 children who had all inherited the unusual inherited form of dementia, the Alzheimer's that comes in working age. And sadly, all 5 children had the gene, so she and her brothers and sisters were all getting dementia. But she and one of her brothers had had a university education, and those two developed their symptoms 10 years older than the ones who hadn't had a university education. So it showed that extra intellectual capacity that they had formed some kind of protection against the development of the symptoms. So do all the things that you can do to stay well, and to repeat, it's exercise, eat and drinking the right things, socialising, all the things that they, I bet volunteering for the Alzheimer's Society here locally probably covers all of those things. Try and avoid brain injury if you can. One of the women doctors who was writing in a paper in the UK this week said that she would never allow her son to play rugby because she just seen so much injury. Now that's a bit extreme and the rugby fanatics don't like it. But there are things you can do that make it less likely. But there's some people who do all of these things and they still get it. So all you can do is do your best. But the research from Professor Carol Brain indicates that some of the things we're doing seem to be making a difference. So get stuck in, stay well, and don't worry about it. Thank you very much. Thank you.